Well, let's stay with that story, the death of صائب Erekat after contracting coronavirus last month. He had been unwell before that, though. Let's talk to Issam Akomawi, who is a correspondent with the BBC's Arabic team, speaking to us from his home in West London. What has been the reaction to the death of Mr. Erekat from Palestinians?
The Palestinian Authority has declared 3 days of mourning for the death of Erekat. There have been very kind words by Mahmoud Abbas, President of the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Prime Minister. Abbas was a very influential figure in the Palestinian Authority. He's been working with the late Yasser Arafat and then with his successor Mahmoud Abbas. His name has very much been associated with the Oslo Accords and the negotiations that have been taking place or took place for a while with the Israelis since then. He was the head of the Palestinian Department of Negotiations. In his later year, he was frustrated by the lack of progress on the negotiation front. He blamed the Israelis for not being serious about giving the Palestinians their right. He was committed to the two-state solution, and he's worked with various Israeli officials, foreign ministers and so forth, prime ministers over the years. But as we said, towards the end of his year, he was very bitter and frustrated about the stalemate in the peace process.
Issam, you're Palestinian. You've watched صائب Erekat for decades now. Personally, how do you feel today?
Well, I've met him several times. He was a kind man. He was a charming man. However, when we heard that he was not unwell and he was diagnosed with the coronavirus, that was back last month, and then he was transferred to an Israeli hospital in West Jerusalem. The fact that he had a lung transplant 3 years ago in the United States made the odds not in his favor. Someone with transplanted lung wasn't going to survive something as serious as COVID-19. Also, he's 65. He wasn't very well lately. So, we were all hoping that a miracle will happen and he will pull through. But unfortunately, that did not happen.
And his popularity, was it amongst all age groups and all people, or perhaps do younger people feel frustrated with the lack of progress and the fact that really he's been unable to deliver on the promises that he's made over the years?
Well, you're right. Many people were disappointed that very little has come out of the negotiation process, the so-called peace process. The Palestinian Authority was established following the Oslo Accords, and there was so much promise at the time that it will lead to an independent Palestinian state. However, over the last 25, 30 years or so, the Palestinians have really got very little to show for it. What they've got, more Israeli settlements, the partition wall that snaking around towns and villages throughout the West Bank, and more restrictions on the movement of Palestinians, and very little in way of gaining their independence and freedom. So he was one of the architects of the Oslo Accords, and therefore many people sort of blamed him, along with the rest of the Palestinian leadership, starting with Arafat and then Mahmoud Abbas, for the lack of, for not delivering what they had committed themselves to. And also many people thought that they've given too many concessions to the Israelis.
Issam, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts, just reflecting on the life and the legacy of صائب Erekat.